I feel really strong about our founding fathers and many of their beliefs. They didn't say anything about allowing a private banking cartel to create money from nothing. Our Congress decides that they want to go to Iraq. This is important. If you're familiar with world markets and monetary markets, you'll understand that the dollar has been tanking. Well, thank you once again for joining me. I'm Daniel Happney, and this is The Real Story. I'm here tonight because, just like my first show, I wanted to, we'll follow up with, we covered some issues on money and the creation of money and what money is and how people exchange money and what happens when money loses its value and what inflation really is. So tonight what I thought I'd follow up and tell you about a hopefully well-known bank, but probably little known for that matter, and that is the Federal Reserve Bank. Okay? To start off with, what is the Fed? How did the Fed come to be? How is it that we have a central bank? That's going to be my topic tonight. And what the effects of having a central bank, or at least in history also, what the effects on other people are of having a central bank. And of course, going through our history and what's changed now that we have a central bank and how it affects you and me. And possibly we'll take it into other shows and find out, who actually runs that central bank. But anyway, we'll start off with the Federal Reserve. Just so you know, the Federal Reserve was created by an act of Congress, and that was, so you'd know, in 1913. The interesting thing was that it was voted on and brought forth during a holiday break. When I say holiday break, it was the Christmas break. Right before the Christmas break, our elected representatives, or at least a couple of them, because most of them had gone home for Christmas, a couple of them decided that, you know what, we should help these bankers create a central banking cartel. And that's what happened. They passed the Federal Reserve Act. The interesting thing was it was signed into law by our president, on the 23rd day of December. So this is right before. So you can consider it maybe a Christmas present from Woodrow Wilson. Another interesting thing, and I usually like to start off with questions, and that is, what year do you think the Internal Revenue Service, or in this case, the income tax, was created? Do you think it could have been the same year? We'll get into that, the reason and all that later, but that's an interesting note, just so you know that, the same year that the Fed was created, the income tax also came into being. I don't believe it was fully ratified by the states, but they didn't tell you that, did they? Maybe you'll learn that in the future. We'll cover things like the Internal Revenue Service on other shows. So anyway, things that you should know, and well, like I say, Socrates taught me to ask questions, so I'll ask you as my audience. Is the Federal Reserve Bank a private bank? Or is it a public bank? That's a question. We'll start with another question, and that is it part of our government, part of the federal government, or not really part of the federal government? With a little pause, you'll think about that. Then I'll enlighten you. And my enlightenment is, it's rather interesting, that's a private bank. And it's about as Federal Express. Now, I don't know if you received a package lately, but there's the post office and then there's Federal Express. So here we have a private bank. Okay, so the next question would be, well, who owns that bank? If it's not part of our government, who owns that bank? The interesting thing was, the early owners of the bank were, let's see these names, Rockefeller, Rothschild, Warburg, interesting names, huh? Morgan. These are names that are still in our banking industry today. You've probably heard of UBS Warburg, Chase Manhattan, the Rockefeller family, Citicorp and all that stuff. The same banking people from a long time ago are the same banking people today. Rather interesting. So a privately held bank is creating our currency. A couple interesting things, and I recommend you go to the Federal Reserve's website. If you were to look at Section 7 of the Federal Reserve Act, you're going to find out that this will get you too. You realize that in Section 7, Part C, that it states there, now once again representatives decided this so that Wilson could sign it, and that is that the Federal Reserve doesn't have to pay any tax. So here we have a private bank making our money, I'd have to tell you, from nothing, and that money, do you think they get taxed on it? It just so turns out they don't. They don't have to pay any federal tax, they don't have to pay any state tax, they don't have to pay any local taxes. Interesting. A private bank makes more than $1 trillion per year, yet they don't have to pay any taxes. What a nice setup that is, huh? I thought it was pretty important and stuff. I thought I'd let you know, because I think you have to pay taxes, don't you? I know I do, or at least they tell me I do. You know, it's a belief that, you know, they want me to hold. Well, other things. Let's find out, you know, when you maybe, if you choose to go to the website, but if you research, why don't you try to find out who does own the Federal Reserve Bank now? It's important because, once again, we have our currency, this fiat being, you know, made from nothing paper currency, issued by a private bank. So I'll ask you, if you had the ability to make all the money that you wanted, you know, that you could just print and just create, is there anything that you couldn't buy? I hate to even sound so cynical, but could you buy a congressman? You know? Could you buy a business? Could you maybe even control economies? If you could control economies, gee, then, you know, could you control things like inflation and deflation? And if so, boy, these ups and downs in economies, you'd be able to buy things that were very cheap and then make them expensive, and then let's say there was a depression or something, you could turn around and buy other things cheap. An interesting thought anyway. That's only if you're a private banker, once again, making trillions of dollars and not having to pay any interest. Rather interesting, huh? So anyway, our Federal Reserve Bank, if you go back to the last show we did, we talked about how money was created. And money, once again, is created by borrowing from this Federal Reserve Bank. And they issue money. Rather interesting, right? They issue money. And once again, they don't have any reserve money. I used the analogy that there was a can next to me, and if I opened the lid, there'd be a whole reserve of money. I could reach into that, and I could give it to our Congress so we could do things with it, and I could, you know, give it to banks and public things. But we'll go back 2 steps, and we'll say, okay, private bank, set up not really for the people, okay? Why was it set up? Why did we need a Federal Reserve Bank? How did they sell this to us? And the interesting thing is we've created a cartel. Yeah, private banking cartel. Pretty interesting, huh? Why do people create cartels? Why do you think we have like OPEC? That's a cartel, right? We're all familiar with the oil cartel of, oil producing countries or whatever. I forget what the full OPEC stands for. But what's interesting is that usually there's only 2 reasons you create cartels. And that's so you can control competition and control prices. Now, when you think money and prices, I remember we talked about stability of money in the first show, but prices. And when I say prices, think of it. My audience today, have you ever, anyone over 50 years old, have you ever in your entire life seen money as easy to get as it is to get this very day? Every day when you come home, is there not a letter in your mailbox about this big that tells you that you too can borrow money? Nowadays, there's commercials on television, and these commercials say that, hey, if you got a clean title to your car, we can lend you money, which means you can eat tonight. And as a homeowner, in Sharon, that's true too. You know, gee, I can always take out a second mortgage and buy another car, you know? All right, some information. We'll get into liquidity in a second. All right, so my question is going to be to you, and that is, you know, why is this private bank allowed to reap millions of dollars in profits from the American people without paying any taxes? You should maybe go home and think about that, because on a grand scale, this might make global implications. But just think about that one. I believe, once again, you all have to pay taxes. All right. All right, the Fed's charter. Gee, is there any reserve? Let's see. Their name, once again, they use the name federal. I got the people thinking they're part of the government. But once again, they're about as Federal Express, being a private bank. Reserve. I looked for that can again. You guys see the can? I don't see the can anymore. Maybe it was just in my imagination. This reserve, gee, there's no reserve there. So they got 2 names. They got federal and reserve. They're not federal, and there is no reserve. Are you waking up yet? Does anything smell fishy? You know, could you believe that maybe we've been schnookered? All right, well, just a thought. Okay. So anyway, you want to find interesting things about the Fed? They also own the DTCC. And you say, gee, Dan, what is the DTCC? If I told you it was the Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation, would you consider that every equity stock that you buy and sell goes through the DTCC? So if you're going to buy and sell some stock, those people are going to know it, aren't they? Well, that's good. I mean, you're going to have it. I mean, somebody has to, you know, control all the transactions. With that in mind, if you were to go to your local bank and you said, if I write a check from my checkbook, and I peel it off and I hand it to you and I say, here, there's payment for some service that you provided and or some good that you provided. What happens to that check? Well, you should follow checks. Following checks is a good idea. By the way, anytime in life, if you want to learn about things, follow the money, they'll tell you. So in our case, we're going to follow that check. Well, once I write a check and I hand it to some, you know, service provider or goods provider, they usually take it and what? Deposit in their bank. Their bank, to clear the check, they send it to who? The Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve, it acts as a clearinghouse for this, and then they send it back to the issuing bank. In which case, by the way, at the transaction point, we actually, take the money out of my bank account from the check I wrote, and we credit the other bank. Rather interesting, huh? They get to see every check you write. These private bankers. Wow. Have you written any checks lately? All right, that's just a thought. You should learn these things because, once again, it's a system. Don't ever doubt that it's a system. Okay, so let's go back to private bank. Why do we have to pay interest to them? Well, there was actually a president who thought that maybe not paying interest to a private bank was a good idea. His name was John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And if you'd like to go out there and research, you may find out that he wrote an executive order one day. And I believe it was on June 3rd of 1963. And he wrote that, I believe it was Executive Order 11,110. And what an interesting executive order. It allowed our government, the United States government, to issue its own currency without borrowing it from this private bank, this Federal Reserve Bank. Wow. Just think of it. We created money and we didn't have to pay anybody interest for it. Wow, that's pretty big. Anyway, he did that by backing the money, with the silver we had in the Treasury. I believe it was in excess of $4.5 trillion that were issued in both $5 denominations and $2. And the interesting thing was, when you looked at the money, I'm using this as a blank, but you'd read across the top of it, and instead of saying Federal Reserve note, everybody reached for their wallets. Go find your Federal Reserve notes and make sure they say that on the top. But this one said United States note. So all of a sudden there was competition for this currency that the private bank made. Do you think they like that? Do you think they like competition? Let's see, they're a cartel. Why do we have cartels? To control competition, that's right. And also, control markets. Wow. So anyway, this president, what a wise guy, huh? I always considered him, by the way, a brave man. Anybody who would swim in the South Seas and drag bleeding people through the water to, in this case, save their lives, that man had courage. And this man knew oceans. And he knew the fishes that were in oceans. But interestingly enough, Executive Order 11,110. It might make good reading someday. I believe Kennedy was a great man. Nobody's perfect. I'm not perfect and stuff, and I'm sure he had made mistakes in his life. But in so doing, by writing that executive order, by issuing currency that actually was backed by something, and by making it so that we as American citizens did not have to pay interest, that we were not indebted to pay interest to some private bank, that was a very, very brave thing to do. That gentleman had courage. Okay? He also, Kennedy, before we lost Mr. Kennedy, he also made statements like he wanted to break the CIA up into like 1,000 pieces. You wonder why he thought that way, What did he know that we don't know? Funny thing is, after they assassinated him, there was all sorts of things that, quote, they knew that they wouldn't tell us because of some commission named the Warren Commission. We'll get into commissions, and I like to call them, whitewashing reports later, but I'm not here to do the Kennedy thing. Today we're here to talk about the Federal Reserve Bank. Okay. So anyway, we learned about the U.S. note. We learned about Kennedy. Okay. Let's go and let's see what else we can learn. Well, we could go over the effects of this money that this Federal Reserve creates, our present, Federal Reserve notes. Well, when you issue money, do you think it's hard? Well, they say follow the money. There's also, I guess you've heard of the golden rule. That is, the people with the gold make the rules. I don't think that changes all through history. So you got these people that control all the money and the creation of it and create as much as they want. I asked you, is there anything they couldn't buy? Is there a business they couldn't buy? Is there, I hate to say it, I don't even like thinking this way, but is there a politician they couldn't buy? It's sad when you think that, many times, they call them corrupt politicians, but politicians can be bought. I only mention that because recently we should all celebrate. Can I celebrate one thing a little bit off from the Fed, and that is the net neutrality bill. They didn't vote on it. So why is that big? That's big because, are you familiar that AT&T and all the big telecommunication companies spent $150 million lobbying for it? And that's why I said, if you had all this money, I guess you could lobby for anything you wanted, huh? $150 million to pass a new net law. All right, that's a whole nother story. Once again, another show. So let's go into, once again, what are the effects of having a private bank that can create our currency? Well, do you think that maybe they could not only control the other banks, competition, once again, you got to be, are you a member of the Fed? Can we inspect your bank and stuff? And, inflation. Remember I told you when you print money out of nothing that all of a sudden it has less value? And we, by the way, print a lot of money. We print so much money that back last year, the Federal Reserve told us, being very upfront, that they were no longer going to publish the M3. The M3 is it's a number. And what kind of number is it? It's the aggregate amount of money that's been created. Well, for some reason, they didn't want us to know that. Why? How much money has been created? Does the volume of money or the quantity of money created affect the purchasing power of the money that's existing? We'll get into that later. That's a funny one, huh? All right. Now, we've got other things for you today. You know, we'll go into, well, let's cover a couple more, and that is the effects on the economy. As you know, gee, the prices of everything have gone up, and they've done that a couple times, and we call it inflation. And I try to inform you that it's really the purchasing power of the dollar going down, you know, that we've been maybe sold one bill of goods and it turned out to be something else. Maybe that's not the first time in life that's happened to us personally. Okay, gee, wars. Gee, let's think about wars for a second. They cost money, all right? I mentioned a little bit in the first show, but let's go over the First World War. It was an interesting war, you know. Some people in Europe decided to shoot each other. I remember in grade school they told me Austria got hungry, you know, took a piece of turkey, slipped on grease, and broke a piece of Africa or something. That was some way to remember the sequence of events that happened that kicked off the First World War. An Austrian person evidently was shot, but we'll start off with wars. Well, the interesting thing, First World War. The Fed's created in 1913. Now it's 1914. Scratch your head and ask yourself, hey, who's the chairman of the Fed? You might find out that his last name was Warburg. Oh yeah, that's right, he's one of the private owners and stuff. Well, and he gets to run it too. He's an owner and he gets to run it. Well, let's go to Germany. Okay, we're over in Germany. Who do you think's the head of the central bank in Germany? You're not going to believe me. You think I'm making it up. His name was Warburg too, his brother. This is good. So anyway, over here in America, somebody's making money. They're making money lending it to us and our government so that we can make bullets. And we can make uniforms because, you know, you got to have soldiers in uniforms. And so we can make bombs and airplanes and tanks and ships and submarines and all this stuff that we have to have because we're going to war. Well, over in Germany, guess what? There's a banker over there. And guess what he's doing? He's lending money to the German government so that they can have bullets, so they can have uniforms, so they can have rations, so they can have guns, so they can what? Shoot Americans. So ask yourself, well, gee, are these bankers anything like gun runners where they don't care who's fighting as long as they're supplying the guns? Kind of interesting. But that's just Warburg, and hey, that's just the beginning of the Fed. Gee, has the Fed done anything else lately? You know, what have you done for me lately, you know? It's interesting because in the past 6 years, they've doubled the money supply. Oh, what does that mean? The money I get's worth half as much? Let me go back. What's happened to the price of housing and stuff? Oh, yeah, that's right. Forgot. All right. Yeah. So when you have more of something, it actually is worth less. The purchasing power, you people, you're being stolen. You're being ripped off. And mostly your media is not telling you. And the question is, why wouldn't the media tell you? Here I am in front of some media, and I am grateful that I get an opportunity to speak to you and tell you this. And that is because maybe if you had all this money, you could buy the media? Well, let's remember there was the Telecommunications Act of 1996, not long ago, folks, and that allowed, well, me, Daniel Hap, if I had the money, which I don't, but to have as many radio stations as I wanted. So now you have companies like Clear Channel who own 1,400 stations. More importantly, back in the Telecommunications Act of 1996, you used to only be able to have 3 television stations in different metro areas. So if you had Boston, Detroit, maybe Houston, or maybe you could have Los Angeles and New York and Atlanta, but now that's all changed. So do you think when you, let's say you see my show this evening or in the daytime, and you travel across the country, you're going to get a different story? Maybe you won't. Maybe you will. That's a whole other issue. But that's, you know, if you had the money, would you buy media? Would you want to, you know, make people wonder, or at least make them think the way you'd like them to? That's a thought. You know, once again, you got all the money, you could do this. So anyway, let's give you some other news. Okay, recent effects. Am I wrong when I said that this is a period of great liquidity? Have you ever seen money as easy to get as it is to get today? Let me tell you how easy it is to get, okay? I'm going to give you some real estate things. Here's stuff on real estate. As a service person, I service people, and I'm many times in their dwellings. And I met a lady, and I said, hey, have you ever seen money as easy to get as it is today? And she said, you don't know the half of it. And I said, no, I study this stuff. This is one of the things I enjoy is money. I'm telling you, it's easy to get. She goes, you don't know the half. And I go, what do you mean I don't know the half? This lady was a mortgage broker, and she informed me that she was able to get a loan for more than 100% of the value of the home and provide it to an individual who had no job. And this individual, by the way, was just out of prison 2 months prior. You're kidding me. When I grew up and stuff, it used to be, hey, you had to have a job, you had to have a down payment, and is money that easy to get? Well, let's think about it. Today we have zero interest loans. Remember those? You hear about them. Hey, come on, we get you in that house right away. You can have a zero-interest loan. They have ARMs, adjustable rate mortgages. There's my ARM. It's adjustable. Maybe low at first, right? And then later on, the interest rates kind of go up. Interesting thought. Well, we have option ARMs. Have you heard about those? Okay, come on, you listen to the radio, you see TV, everybody's trying to sell your house and all this other stuff. Option ARMs, you know what the options are? You get the option of paying the interest. You don't have to. You get the option of paying the principal. What happens if you don't? Well, they get added on to the total cost. So the total cost goes up. Now, of course, you're going to have to pay interest on that, but just a thought. These are what people call in the money industry, these are vehicles so that we could have home ownership, let's say. Rather interesting. By the way, do you think with all this easy money that it would have brought speculators into the market and caused the price of housing to go up? Which, by the way, would have increased what? Your tax bill? That's right, because your valuation went up, didn't it? I forgot about that. All right, so anyway, no income verification. By the way, you don't have to tell us that you have a job because, you know, it's a home loan. We trust you, okay? No money down. That's right, you know. Years ago, when I was just a little wee bit kid, you had to have like 10% down, 20% down. You want to be a homeowner? You got to show us you could save some money. Not today, though. So anyway, that's why I call it, and I believe the term is great liquidity. So here we have a period of great liquidity. Okay, why do banks have such loose lending standards? Well, think about it. We'll take our local banks or our faraway banks, but when I get a loan, I get a bank, right? I give them a mortgage, an IOU, promising to pay with interest, okay, the money that I borrowed. Okay, what's the bank do with mortgages? Gee, the last time I heard, they sell them. Who do they sell them to? Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. By the way, if you've got any money in, well, I'm not going to go into that, but take a look at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and what's happened to the, quote, valuations and what they're doing. I believe one of them stopped telling you what their accounts were in 2004 and told you they couldn't even tell you what the books were doing in 2006. So anyway, these banks got these loans from these people, gave them money for the house, which money really never left the bank. But the important thing is now they took these mortgages, they wrap an insurance policy around them, and they sell them off. Okay, they're now bonds, fixed asset securities. You ever hear those terms? You know who the wrapping company is? AIG. They're down in New Jersey, down in Newark. You should find out about them. Anyway, where I'm going with it is, so now we're selling these things as securities. Interesting. Huh. And so what happened to the bank? Well, it sold off your mortgage or somebody else's mortgage, and they got credited back the money. What do banks do with money? Do you think they lend it? Do you think that's what they're in the business of doing? How many times can they do this? What does that do to our money supply? What has that done to the price of houses? You may think you're rich because they tell you your house is worth a lot, but you know, a house is a house, and it'll always be a house. Just because it takes more units, in this case Federal Reserve notes, to buy that house, it's still the same house. Rather interesting. So, this is some of the effects, or at least some of the, we went over the vehicles of this great liquidity. I'm not even going to go into the credit card thing. Once again, well, let's go into the credit card thing. Have I mentioned my dog, Lacey? I've got the cutest dog. She's a wonderful girl. She's a part of my family. And you know what? They want to give her credit. I'm not kidding. Your household pets now can get credit. What would your household pets do with credit? I'm trying to think of my dog, ready? Maybe they can have paw prints or scanning or something, you know, when it wants to go out and get some more bones or, you know, pig's ears or whatever it is, dog food, stuff like that, you know, maybe a new collar. So anyway, boy, my pet, a platinum card. I'm not kidding. You think I'm jesting. I'm actually going to prove at some point that, you know what, my pet is getting, you know, constant letters to go get a credit card. You may have also received them once again. So this period, once again, of great liquidity, that's where we put lots of money in the market, right? It has the effect in the short term of making the economy seem rosy and wonderful. But what's the effect a week or 2 weeks later, a year later? What happens, once again, is too much money's in the market chasing too few goods. You have what we all know as inflation. Okay, because there's so much money, it buys so much less. All right, let me give you one of the effects in Massachusetts published by the Boston Globe just this week. Massachusetts properties in various stages of foreclosure, up 481%. You know what that is in percentage-wise? That's up like almost 5 times for the second quarter of 2005. You think it's because of some of these interesting liquidity vehicles we said for housing where we had option arms, we had adjustable rate mortgages, we had no verification for, you know, gee, do you even have income to buy a house? Rather interesting. So who's going to be able to buy all these houses when they become cheap and all these people get foreclosed on? Could it be the people with all the money? Oh, once again, who are the people with all the money? Who are their friends? How do they become our elected officials? Does anybody ever look where the money? Follow the money, people. So, other things. Okay, dangers from fraudulent fiat money. Let me give you some of the dangers. I've tried to, you know, enlighten you to some of them, but Corruption of political process and the loss of representative government. That's right. We believe we have a representative government. Do you feel like you're being represented? Did you want our people in war or out of war? Did you speak? Okay. Okay. Concentration of wealth in a few hands. Has anybody seen the stats? What does 1% of America own compared to the rest of the, quote, Americans? Loss of savings and pensions of ordinary people. Do any of you have pensions? Do you have savings? Do you want those savings to be worth something next time? Loss of jobs for ordinary people. Gee, what is unemployment? What kind of jobs are out there? You know, you can have all sorts of education, but have you guys noticed anybody building factories or doing anything around here, you know, to provide the employment that pays the salary required to float the note of the houses that you know, think about that. If you want, once again, things to be good for your kids and all that. Social unrest and discrediting government. Ooh, I've heard of that before. Okay, collapse of our economic system along with mass hardship and suffering. I hate to be the bringer of bad news, you know. A change in the basic form of government, possibly tyranny. My gosh! Pretty shocking stuff. Let me give you some quotes. This one's from Thomas Jefferson. Thoughts I want you to leave with this evening or this day. This is from Thomas. He was a smart guy. He said, if the American people ever allow private banks to control the issuance of their currencies, first by inflation and then by deflation, the banks and corporations that will grow around them will deprive the people of all their prosperity until their children will wake up homeless on the continent that their fathers conquered. I'd love to say it twice for you, but I think you should tape this show and replay that. Okay? I'll give you one from a guy by the name of Rothschild. Find out about the Bank of England and Bank of France and the House of Rothschild. But Rothschild had a great quote. I liked it. It was, "Give me control of a nation's money supply, and I care not who makes its laws." This was not a dumb man also. He took control of the Bank of England. Their family took control of the Bank of France. Okay? Hello, people? Okay? What do they know? What do we know? I'm trying to help you with the real story. This is important. It's more important for your children than it is for you and me, because we're going to do what we can do. But what are we going to leave them? So, anyway, what I want you to do is I want you to do something. It's not a do nothing. Wake up. Maybe take a good look at who you're working for. You know? What's left for, you know, what can you do? How can you help these people? I think you should take serious consideration into looking into the Federal Reserve and find out, hey, once again, is what Dan said right? Was it railroaded through Congress right during a holiday break? Was it signed by a president right before Christmas? You know? Maybe even go out there and research this stuff. And at the end of the show, I'll tell you maybe some sites and stuff you can go to not only on the web, but books you can read. A great book I recommend, The Creature from Jekyll Island. Sounds like a horror movie. Sounds like a, you know, find it. Also, your public library has great information, and I'll list that after the show that you can look up. Maybe if you learn this, then you'll know the real story. And if you know it and stuff, maybe you'll help me change it. Maybe we can get back to honest money. Maybe we can, you know, do things that'll help our elders and our children at the same time, instead of put up with a lot of deceit and, you know, accept or conform to what someone else wants us to do. Maybe we can stand up. How many real men do you know? How many good men do you know? You know? Are you going to do something? Now that you know some information, are you going to at least check it? Do you want your children to live in servitude? Think about it. This is what I found interesting. The condition upon which God hath given liberty to man is eternal vigilance. You ever hear that one before? Which condition, if he breaks, servitude is at once the consequence of his crime. Servitude, huh? And the punishment of his guilt. Kind of heavy stuff. I know it seems like a lot. So, I want to thank you once again for this great opportunity to at least tell you about what's happening around you, whether you see it or not. And thank you for watching the show. Hopefully you'll tell your friends. Let everyone learn about money. It's probably the most important thing you can learn about. Okay? Because if you follow the money, usually you're going to find the truth. And with the truth, hopefully you'll find the real story.